Good evening, everyone. I'm the Drapery Falls, and today I'm back with another tier list. This time it's on old school death metal debut albums. And this isn't like a pre-made list. I picked out some albums that I knew I wanted to talk about, and I didn't want to just include every album I know or every album that I've listened to, so I left some of them off. But this list still ended up being, I think, 48 albums. So hopefully this video is going to be too long. I might have to split this into two parts, but we'll see. So I just want to start with my tier system. You got Absolute Cinema, pretty self-explanatory. A, B, C, and then this is kind of my D tier. I'm being nice. They tried. And this is not like F tier. I'm not saying that albums in this tier are bad. They might actually be pretty good. But, you know, I have to be critical. I gotta put on my big, stupid critic goggles. And I have to really scrutinize, because in my head, I kind of consider most of these albums to be like A tier. There was just so much peak quality during this era, like mostly late 80s and early 90s. You have to really look to find legitimately bad death metal coming out at this time. And I'm just gonna get the peak out of the way. If you know me, and you probably know me, you should know me, you would know that this is Absolute Cinema. I don't even need to discuss it. I'm just going to put it up there, and I'm going to move on. Now, there are a few albums that people like to debate as being like the start of death metal, and I don't really care about pinpointing like exactly where the genre started, but it is interesting to me to go back and just see like the roots of certain musical genres. How did these styles form? What were they like in the very beginning? And you could go before this, you could go pre-1987 or 85, and talk about bands like Slayer, Sodom, Hellhammer, Bathory, stuff like that. And of course, I'm talking about Death with Scream Bloody Gore. This whole album has a really campy feel. It's just really fun to listen to. You can't not love Chuck's high screams, and there are just so many like legendary songs in here. Zombie Ritual, Baptized in Blood. Death was actually one of the first metal bands I ever really got into and like binged their entire discography back when I was like 12 or 13. And I kind of feel like Leprosy is just overall better in every way. It's much more death metal sounding. And also Spiritual Healing. I have no idea why people seem to think that Spiritual Healing is one of their weaker albums. Makes no sense. I think it's one of their best. And for me, the absolute peak of Death is still Symbolic. Like, Crystal Mountain might be one of the best written metal songs of all time. That album just makes you feel powerful. Cinemabolic. But yeah, if I'm being fair, compared to a lot of the albums on this list, I'm gonna have to give it a C tier, but it's like a high C tier. And of course, the other album that people like to fight over as being like the first death metal album is Possessed with Seven Churches. It is pretty much just an extreme thrash album, but there are those little details that they throw in that are like staples in death metal that they kind of pioneered. And other bands weren't doing it at the time. But this is just absolute, like, no mercy, venomous early death metal and thrash. I would put it just below Death, but killer album. Now let's move on to some more cinema. I have so many plays on this album. The first two Deicide albums are like shotgunning a monster. They're so intense, they're so high energy, they just make you feel pumped up. It's also campy, but kind of for a different reason, just because it's so over the top and it just sounds so evil. Like right from the rip. Lunatic of God's Creation. Holy shit, that riff. Riffs on this album are just razor sharp. They cut deep. Glenn Benton's super high-pitched vocals on here, it sounds like a choir of demons. You got Suicide Sacrifice, Destruction of Holy Life, of course. Dead by Dawn, one of like the staple death metal songs of all time. Deicide from the album Deicide, from the band Deicide. Mephistopheles, I could pretty much name the entire album. Now the second album, Legion, has an overall sound that I slightly prefer because they got even more brutal and more technical. I actually kind of feel like early Deicide was kind of a precursor to brutal death metal. Like a lot of the riffs remind me of bands like Discord, even though it's still kind of rooted in thrash. But yeah, on Legion, you got the Cacodemon. Trifiction is one of my favorite of theirs. And In Hell I Burn as well. But if I'm being honest, they're both deserving of Absolute Cinema. I wasn't even really into Once Upon the Cross. Like, I listened to it maybe twice, and I thought it was pretty good, but it's just nowhere near the first two. And I'm in a similar situation with Morbid Angel. Covenant and Altars of Madness, even though they both have very different sounds, I have a countless number of plays on both of those. It's really hard for me to say which one is better. It honestly depends on the day. But I think Altars of Madness is easily deserving of cinema. This album is so consistent, like every song is amazing. Maze of Torment, Chapel of Ghouls, like goddamn. Just has that pissed off, angsty energy of a young band. I love David Vincent's dry, raspy vocals on here. And surprisingly for 89, a really good mix. I love the bass on here. This album just beats you to death with amazing shredding, pummeling drums. Treyazagoth is really one of the most influential musicians in death metal. Like, you hear other bands mimic his riffing style so much. And also with the lyrical themes about, you know, Lovecraft and ancient civilization, altars of cinema. And another one of the earlier death metal bands I got into. Next up is Bolt Thrower with In Battle There Is No Law. One of the heaviest albums for its year. I think this was 88. That UK scene with like Carcass, Napalm Death, Bolt Thrower, they were super ahead of their time. My favorite Bolt Thrower album would have to be The Fourth Crusade, and I think Realm of Chaos would probably follow after that. But I would still put In Battle There Is No Law in the upper echelon of their discography. And of course this band is infamous for being extremely consistent. I love the mix of fast, noisy, grindy sections with those huge, heavy Bolt Thrower riffs that we know and love. I've always loved Carl Willitz's raspy vocal delivery. It's a little higher register on this one. He just sounds like a corpse. I'm gonna go with B for Battle, or B for Bolt Thrower. So next up is Immolation. This is super fast, pretty technical for the time. Lots of unique ear-catching riffs on here. The overall sound is interesting, has kind of a fuzzy guitar tone that I like a lot. Very comparable to Angel Corpse, and it's basically Altars of Madness on crack. And a lot of people prefer their other albums, which have a slower, more dissonant feel, like Close to a World Below. Some of the riffs kind of remind me of Gojira, but I find myself coming back to the debut the most. Next is Incantation with Onward to Golgotha. People often compare these two bands, that's why I put them next to each other, and they don't really sound a whole lot similar. I think it's mostly because the names are similar, and they're both very consistent death metal bands from the Northeast. The album is fucking disgusting. This is like swamp death metal. Usually people talk about muddy production as being a bad thing, but this album totally uses the murk to its advantage. It creates a lot of atmosphere. There's a big wall of noise. You kind of get a mix of swirling tremolos and also crushing death doom sections, like in Rotting Spiritual Embodiment. I think it deserves an A. Deceased is an interesting band that more people should talk about, because this is arguably early melodic death metal, maybe the first example of it. A lot of the riffs are rooted in classic heavy metal. Sometimes it sounds more like an early Iron Maiden demo, but mixed with death metal vocals. And really the formula for mellow death is epic heavy metal riffing combined with elements of death metal. This album is really fun to listen to. It's a bit heavier than their sophomore album, which was more thrashy and less raw. I'd give it a low B. Autopsy with Severed Survival. The mix on this is infamously awful, but there is a ton of charm to the music. It's not quite as doomy as the stuff they're known for. I prefer the kind of slow, Sabbathy, kind of bluesy riffs on Mental Funeral. I think that was more unique, but it's clearly very extreme for the time. It's grimy, it's gory, but they're one of those bands where I feel like the bands that copy them do their sound a little bit better. C tier. One of those bands is Asphyx from the Netherlands. The guitar tone has the perfect crunch. It's just bone-crushingly heavy. I really like the high register, like dry, hoarse vocal delivery from Martin van Drunen. The title track is 9 minutes long, and it's a masterpiece. I also hear a lot of Bolt Thrower in this band's sound overall. I was gonna put this in B for a while, but I think it deserves a low A. Now, we can't forget about this group of mad lads, the Legends, Cannibal Corpse. They're on, like, I don't even know, 17, 18 albums at this point. And this is Eaten Back to Life, their debut. There's so many iconic songs on here. It's so catchy, it's so well written. The overall sound is thrashier, but you can tell from the songwriting this is pure Cannibal Corpse. Shredded Humans, Skull Full of Maggots, Born in a Casket, Scattered Remains, I could go on. Just hooks upon hooks throughout this album. Great to headbang to. Butchered at Birth and Tomb of the Mutilated is kind of where it's at for me, but this is still a solid B tier. Now we're going to be taking a trip over to Sweden for the next group of albums on this list. Left Hand Path, you know it, you love it. It's so close to being cinema for me. It's almost cinema. A for almost cinema. One of the most iconic Dan Seagrave paintings of all time. I love it so much. What can I say about this album that hasn't already been said before? The title track is a legit masterpiece. The guitar tone is so blown out, it's so loud, it's so gainy, but it's so good at the same time. Riffs that just cut deep into your soul. I love the punk influence that you can hear on songs like Bitter Loss. Whole thing is just really catchy. Grave with Into the Grave. Really good album. It's like an even more raw, nasty, and arguably heavier version of Entombed. It just doesn't have the it factor of Left Hand Path. Like, some of the songs don't stick in my mind quite as much. The songwriting is good, but I feel like it doesn't take the extra step into being like total genius like this. Still a solid B. Dismember with like an ever-flowing stream is kind of like the more melodic older sibling of Left Hand Path. It actually resembles Clandestine a little bit more. Override of the Overture, Skinner Alive, Dismembered. When I first heard this album, I was obsessed with those songs. Gormand with The Ending Quest. This has kind of a similar guitar tone to the other Swedish death metal bands, but it's more unique. It's less overblown, but arguably a bit grittier. The lead guitar has a really weird sounding tone. It's very different, but I like it a lot. I like the contrast. The dichotomy is crazy. It kind of sounds more like a band from Finland than from Sweden. And just the tone of this album has a certain mournful, emotional sound that you don't really hear that much in death metal in general. It's much more like an early example of death doom. It's kind of like Asphyx, but Asphyx is a little more primal and more ruthless. Edge of Sanity is a very good band. Dan Swano is a legend. Much respect deserved. But their first attempt wasn't super memorable. They definitely had not found their sound. This is more kind of straightforward death metal. Kind of feels like it's following a lot of the trends at the time. They kind of flirt with melodic riffs a little bit, but they don't dive too deep into that aspect of their sound. Fair to say that they tried. And now the final Swedish band on this list is Hypocrisy with Penetralia. They're more known today as a melodeath band, but their first two albums were pretty much meat and potatoes death metal. You could kind of compare this to like Cannibal Corpse. It's semi-melodic, but I feel like it's more influenced by American death metal than the other bands surrounding them. Lots of great songs and great riffs. I think it falls into a similar category as Grave. Disincarnate with Dreams of a Carrion Kind. This album makes me really wish I put an A+ category in there. It's basically cinema. It's like a short film. This has James Murphy on guitars. You know him from Death, legend. It's a good balance between thrash and groove, and it's pretty brutal. The riffs just slay on every song. The guitars have the perfect thrashy, sizzling tone. It's like Beneath the Remains, but better. Production overall is really good. I would compare it to Deicide, Cannibal Corpse, and like a hint of Suffocation. Unfortunately, if you're a metal band and you decide to never make a second album, there is a 90% chance that your music is peak. Chrysian with Black Forest Domain. Now this band rules. I have seen them live. They're amazing. This is a 3-piece from Brazil. And their third album, Conquerors of Armageddon, is incredible. It's like cocaine. That's where they started to sound more like Angel Corpse. But maybe I just need more time with this album. I'm just not nearly as big of a fan of it. It's really noisy to the point of being annoying. The songs just didn't really hook me. It's very chaotic. It's in that kind of proto-war metal category. They definitely tried, and they got way better. Gorguts is a fantastic band. I have this picture of me and my dad with Luke LeMay when I saw them with Cannibal Corpse. And this is another example of a band that hadn't quite found their sound yet. Considered Dead is mostly meat and potatoes death metal, and they're more known for being a more dissonant, progressive band with a lot of Suffocation influence. For me, the sweet spot in their discography is their second album. It's more technical, it's more interesting to listen to, and it's still grounded in that old school death metal style. Songs like Orphans of Sickness are especially awesome. I'm going B tier. Another campy, nostalgic, flirty, and death metal album, Massacre with From Beyond. It sounds a lot like the first couple of Death albums, mixed with Malevolent Creation. I love the Ed Repka cover art. He has kind of a comic book style. It looks more like a thrash album than it does a death metal album. The songs are still great, just not good enough to be above C tier. Fleshcrawl from Germany with Descend into the Absurd. This album kind of sounds like a hybrid of the Swedish and Finnish death metal styles. You got similar sort of melodies and atmosphere of Finnish death metal, mixed with that murky, doomy incantation sound. And those styles mix really well. It sounds very European overall. The one thing I can knock for this is that the songs tend to drag a little too long. They could have easily shaved off a few minutes. And because it does that, sometimes it misses that like full force energy that I want. But I can't deny it's really good. B tier. Pungent Stench. For God Your Soul, For Me Your Flesh. This is a band from Austria. They're a really fun band to listen to. They clearly do not take themselves seriously. It's very punky. They're all about just kind of fun, bouncy grooves. The production is super raw, and the vocals are ridiculous. The lyrics are absurd. Kind of like Impetigo. Even though I love listening to this band, I can't deny that their songs can be a little half-baked. Most other bands on this list have more substance, and it would be unfair to rank them too high. C tier. Obituary with Slowly We Rot. Now this is a classic band. They absolutely kill live. I saw them with Nails at the Showbox in Seattle. Amazing show. And this is a band where I kind of wish I discovered them earlier in my metal listening journey. It's very punky. The riffs are very simplistic. I feel like I would have latched onto this more if I hadn't heard other stuff. But it's almost too simple to where when I'm listening to it, I kind of just want something more. I love John Tardy's over-the-top kind of drawl. And I actually prefer this over Cause of Death. I think Cause of Death is more drawn out. I like that it's less slow. It doesn't lay in the same riffs over and over again. C tier. Jungle Rot with Skin the Living. It does that hyper groove style a bit better than Obituary, but just a bit. This is just a full platter of all the meat and potatoes you could ever want. When you decide to listen to this band, you are not getting blast beats, you're not getting fluttery guitar, it is not technical at all, it's really basic, but I can't deny the riffs hit hard. The songs are really short, just kind of a few ideas. Now, I know death metal likes to talk about B-movies, but I want to talk about cinema. And cinema is Ripping Corpse, Dreaming with the Dead. This is another one-off album, and it's really interesting because sometimes it sounds super 80s and punky and thrashy. The vocals are almost more like punk vocals. They're not like super guttural and grisly, it's more of a shout. But sometimes it's extremely bone-crushingly heavy. There are some moments like in Rift of Hate that are basically straight up slam and brutal death metal. You got Eric Rattan on this album, and the guitar writing across the board is pure cinema. But I think as a whole, it is almost cinema. The Chasm is an interesting band from Mexico City, kind of building off the blueprint created by Morbid Angel. This is their album Procreation of the Inner Temple. Songwriting gets very adventurous, it's more melody-oriented. There's a hint of Demolition there and a hint of Incantation. I think they got better over the course of their next two albums. B tier. The next album is legendary, Cynic with Focus. The name is accurate because even though they are a very progressive and forward-thinking band, the songwriting is very focused, it's all very intentional. There's a tasteful use of clean vocals, and I love the alien-sounding effect they use. Kind of like individual thought patterns on Ketamine. Really just trippy album overall. A tier. Another band cut from the same cloth as Cynic is Atheist with Piece of Time. This is a super fun band to see live. Kind of a death thrash hybrid. I think of it as more of a progressive thrash album. This band loves their jazz fusion. They were kind of the first band to really bring those avant-garde, left-field jazzy elements into death metal. Now I am more of a fan of Unquestionable Presence. That album got even weirder, even trippier, even more inventive. The first album's still good, but I think it belongs near the top of C. Malevolent Creation, The Ten Commandments. Another high-energy, blasty, vicious sort of band, kind of like Deicide, but not quite. They don't jump out at me as being super unique, but they are a very solid band, and this is a great album. Low B. The first Pestilence album, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce. I keep thinking that Consuming Impulse is their debut, but it's not. It's this one, which is very different. It feels more like a thrash album, which makes sense because it came out in '88. Martin Van Derden's vocals aren't even quite death metal-y yet. More of a thrashy shout. It actually sounds a lot like Possess, but this album is still great. Pretty technical, maybe more so than Consuming Impulse. There's a lot of hooks and a lot of unique riffs, and you still have those heavy, mosh-friendly breakdown moments. That's kind of a teaser for what they're about to bring with the follow-up. Low B. I kind of lumped in all the thrashy bands together. This is Sadist with Illusions. This album is mental. This is about as extreme as thrash metal gets, with elements of death metal. Every song is so fast, so raw, they don't waste a single second. It's almost like proto-grindcore at times. It might be kind of hard to get into at first, but once you do, you realize how addicting it is. This is like pure diesel fuel injected into your veins. But it's pretty far from being cinema. It's more like a well-produced YouTube video, except ironically it's not a well-produced album. Gotta keep filling out the B-row. Now a very left-field band, Demolich with Nespith. I know nowadays there's a lot of bands out that draw influence from Demolich, but when this album first came out, it was totally alien compared to anything else. The style of riff writing on here is so strange. You don't really get much chug or tremolo. It's mostly a bunch of single notes played in this quasi-melodic way that's also super technical, and no one else was doing this at the time. Everything about it stood out. The artwork, the gurgly frog vocals, the absurd song titles. It's like this thing isn't from the same dimension. I'm not often in the mood for Nespith, but when I am, it's always a treat. A tier. Another amazing Finnish band. I was really into this album when I first heard it, even more than Nespith. Sentenced with Shadows of the Past. This is kind of like Left Hand Path with more death doom. It's extremely heavy. The song Disengagement has an insane riff in it. Do yourself a favor and check out Sentenced. Also check out their second album, North From Here. It's more of a mellow death album, but it's still really good. It is cinema. It's not absolute cinema, but it is definitely cinema. Nocturnus, The Key. This is an album where I love the concept, and the execution is kind of lackluster. It's another very thrashy album, and they tried to go spacey. They tried to elevate the death metal sound by utilizing keyboards, making it somewhat progressive. They went for a sci-fi theme. I love the artwork on this. I've tried many times to listen to this album all the way through. I do have ADHD, but for some reason I kept not finishing it. I have heard it all the way through, but I think that's kind of an indication of how I feel about it. So in my opinion, this one's pretty much C tier. Brutality from Florida with Screams of Anguish. This is a true gem. It's like Morbid Angel and Disincarnate on shrooms. Every riff is golden. It's like the perfect balance of heavy and melodic. The drumming is fantastic. It's very Pete Sandoval-esque. It's so well-rounded and well-crafted. It's just top-shelf quality. A tier. Now I wanted to include this album, Season of the Dead by the band Necrophagia, because this came out 3 months before Scream Bloody Gore, in February of '87. And this album is just an interesting piece of history. It's so painfully obvious that this is just a group of college-age kids who can barely play their instruments, and they're trying to make dark, extreme music, but it's so amateur that it doesn't even sound that extreme compared to like Possessed or Slayer or something. It's like Autopsy, but even sloppier with an even worse recording. The vocals are kind of funny. They're really not good. They're really corny. He's just kind of screaming with like a low kind of register. I don't want to be too harsh on this, but they tried. They absolutely tried. It's honestly kind of endearing. And another band that I think does the mid-paced, meat and potatoes groovy style better than Obituary or Jungle Rot is Rotorvor from Pennsylvania. The opening song, Gestures of Recession, has really great riffs. Just a solid beatdown of chug and groove. I like the overall raw sound of it. But not every song is memorable. Sometimes I feel like these songs are missing like the money riff. Beater. Morpheus Descends is another tragic case of a band putting out one outstanding album and then just deciding to fuck off. They put out 2 EPs later, but it's just not the same. This album is basically brutal death metal mixed with crawling cavernous death. It's like Suffocation mixed with Incantation, and it's a match made in heaven. If you haven't heard it, please do, but make sure you're in a private place because you're gonna nut. The Northeast in the 90s is really where so much of like the filthiest, most gruesome death metal came from. I think part of the reason for that is the hardcore influence. A tier. Sinister with Cross the Sticks. Another band that's very comparable to Deicide. It's fast, thrashy, semi-technical, high energy, and still has pockets of groove. They're a Dutch band, but it has a very Floridian kind of sound. Next up is Drawn and Quartered with To Kill Is Human. I wanted to include this band because they are from my state, the glorious land of volcanoes and flannel, so already a pretty big W for that. But this album is pretty brutal, pretty raw, there's a lot of big primal riffs, and it's just very grisly sounding. But it also has that murky, cavernous feel. It's a lot like Morpheus Descends. A tier, and not just because they're from Washington. Maybe partially because they're from Washington. It's really a B tier album, but A for the bit. Carcass has kind of morphed their sound to fit a bunch of different styles over the course of their career, but they're on this list because they're mostly known as a death metal band. Reek of Putrefaction was the most extreme shit to come out in 1988 by far. This was a whole new level compared to anything else at the time. That being said, it's not the best thing to come out at the time. By far. Even a lot of Goregrind fans would agree that this album is pretty hard to listen to, and I like Goregrind. The songs aren't even really songs, it's kind of just a few riffs and some really noisy blast beats that drown them out. I like coming back to this album from time to time because again, it's an interesting piece of metal history. It's genuinely impressive how they made some drums, guitars, and vocals sound so horrifically bad. I applaud them for that. They definitely tried, and they had a massive glow up immediately after the Cancer to the Glory End. Massacre, but better. I would also compare it a lot to Eden Back to Life. It's thrashy, it's catchy, it's fun. I think they improved on their follow-up, Death Shall Rise, but this is still a B tier. One of my favorite bands of all time, just in general, Nile, with Amongst the Catacombs of Nefren Ka. One of my earliest concert memories was seeing Nile. I've seen them twice. This album has a different sort of sound than what they're most known for. It's less technical, it's more rooted in old school death metal, but some of their best songs that they love to play live and get the pit spinning around here. Ramses, Bringer of War, Howling of the Djinn, and the second song, which I'm not going to try to pronounce. It's no Annihilation of the Wicked, but it's catchy, it's brutal, it's badass, it's got those cool Middle Eastern melodies. Strong B tier. Now, if you know me, you know that I love me some None So Vile, but Cryptopsy's debut, Blasphemy Made Flesh, is almost on that level. They have an instantly recognizable riffing style. Flo is absolutely punishing his drum kit. Songs like Abigor, Open Face Surgery, Pathological Frolic are all very memorable, and their writing would get even better on None So Vile. There's also the disadvantage of having a much muddier mix. Cryptopsy haven't quite achieved cinema yet, more like a Netflix original, but they're getting there. Now, I wanted to save the most absolute of absolute cinema for last. Intestine Ballism is one of my all-time favorite death metal bands. They're from Japan, and they basically combine raw, nasty, heavy, old-school death metal with fierce, triumphant melodic riffs from the Gothenburg scene. All 3 of their albums are peak. They're all cinema. Melodeath has separated itself so far from old-school death metal that you can almost categorize it as being its own genre. I still love Melodeath, but it often lacks a lot of the key features of death metal, especially when you get into bands like Children of Bodom and Kalma, that are more on the power metal side. But Intestine Ballism, especially on their debut, sounded way more like proper death metal. And really, the dichotomy is crazy. It's all about the dichotomy. I don't think you guys are really understanding the dichotomy of the situation here. The vocals are sick and nasty, the songwriting is top tier, you go from sledgehammer riffs to soaring leads, and then finally, another one-off album from this group of hooligans from Washington, from Seattle, proving that we are the best. Infester, To the Depths in Degradation. I could go on for hours about this album. Whenever I've tried to make a list of my favorite metal albums of all time, this is always one of the first ones to pop into my head. It sounds so twisted and disturbing and filthy. They do Incantation better than Incantation ever could. The vocals are so deep and demonic, the riffs slither and contort, there's lots of big Death Doom moments, and the use of synths to build atmosphere on these songs is brilliant. This is just such a one-of-a-kind album, it's really lightning in a bottle, and it truly sounds otherworldly. Now I wanted to include one more album. Now I've heard some people say that this one is pretty decent. I haven't personally heard it myself, and you might be asking yourself, how can you rank something if you haven't even listened to it? And it's because I already know what tier it belongs in. That's about right. Well, no, that does it for my tier list. I might do a part 2 on sophomore albums from these bands, but for now, if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, click the bell to get notified whenever I upload, comment what bands I should talk about next. Have a great rest of your day, and bye.